What's wrong with America today? The state of governance in the United States has reached a critical juncture where systemic issues threaten the principles of democracy, equity, and justice that form the nation's foundation. From the erosion of voting integrity to the concentration of power in the executive branch and the weaponization of rhetoric and policy against vulnerable populations, the challenges are multifaceted. Historical parallels and current actions highlight the urgent need for reform to prevent further degradation of public trust, institutional independence, and societal cohesion. This video seeks to examine these pressing concerns, drawing comparisons to past empires and authoritarian tendencies to underscore the necessity for immediate action and a sustainable path forward. Since resuming office on January 20th, 2025, President Donald Trump has enacted several measures that align closely with the objectives outlined in the Dangerously Authoritarian Project 2025, a comprehensive conservative initiative aimed at restructuring federal governance. Key actions include the Heritage Foundation's Project 2025. The Heritage Foundation is a prominent conservative think tank, and its Project 2025 outlines a dangerously ambitious roadmap to reshape the federal government. Here's why this plan raises concerns. Centralization of power. Consolidating executive authority. The plan includes proposals to significantly reduce the size of federal agencies, centralize power in the hands of political appointees, potentially undermining the expertise and neutrality of career civil servants. This could politicize traditionally apolitical institutions like the Department of Justice or the Environmental Protection Agency. Spoils system revival. Project 2025 advocates for dismantling protections for federal employees, making it easier to fire civil servants who resist partisan agendas. This risks creating a government loyal to individuals rather than the Constitution. Rollback of regulations. Targeting progressive policies. The plan explicitly aims to dismantle environmental protections, labor rights, and LGBTQ+ rights, framing these as unnecessary bureaucratic overreach. While reducing regulations can streamline governance, gutting them without adequate replacement frameworks risks harming vulnerable populations and the environment. Erosion of checks and balances. Judicial and legislative weakening. By consolidating power in the executive branch, the project could marginalize the judiciary and Congress, disrupting the balance of powers essential to democracy. On his first day, President Trump reinstated Schedule F, reclassifying thousands of federal employees as political appointees, thereby making them easier to dismiss. This move facilitates the replacement of existing personnel with individuals loyal to his administration, a strategy central to Project 2025's goal of consolidating executive power. Appointment of Project 2025 architects. The administration has appointed several key figures associated with Project 2025 to prominent positions. Notably, Russ Vought, a principal architect of the project, is expected to lead the Office of Management and Budget, positioning him to influence budgetary decisions in line with the project's vision. Rescission of previous executive orders. Through the initial rescissions of harmful executive orders and actions, President Trump has nullified numerous directives from prior administrations. This action reflects Project 2025's emphasis on dismantling existing policies to pave the way for new conservative reforms. Overhaul of diversity, equity, and inclusion, DEI. Programs. An executive order was signed to terminate all DEI initiatives within the federal government, mandating a shift towards merit-based employment practices. This aligns with Project 2025's objective to eliminate programs perceived as promoting divisive ideologies. While the executive order mandates a shift towards merit-based employment, it does not delineate specific standards or processes for evaluating merit, leaving the implementation of such assessments to the discretion of individual agencies and contractors' preference for loyalists. Strategic cabinet appointments. The administration has nominated individuals aligned with Project 2025's principles to key cabinet positions. For instance, Kristi Noem has been confirmed as Secretary of Homeland Security, where she is expected to implement stringent immigration policies consistent with the project's framework. Additionally, several individuals associated with Project 2025 have been appointed to positions within the Trump administration. For instance, Stephen Miller, founder of America First Legal, a partner organization of Project 2025, has been appointed as Deputy Chief of Staff for Policy. Tom Homan, a contributor to Project 2025, has been appointed as Border Czar. Collectively, these actions demonstrate a concerted effort to implement the strategies outlined in Project 2025, reflecting a significant shift in federal governance towards the project's conservative vision. Pardoning of violent criminals. On January 20th, 2025, President Donald Trump issued a proclamation granting clemency to individuals involved in the January 6, 2021, Capitol attack. This action included full pardons for approximately 1,500 individuals and commutations for 14 prominent figures. Notable commutations. Stewart Rhodes, founder of the Oath Keepers, originally sentenced to 18 years for seditious conspiracy. Enrique Tarrio, leader of the Proud Boys, who had been serving a prison sentence for seditious conspiracy and other charges. The clemency actions have been met with mixed reactions. Some individuals, such as Jason Riddle, a U.S. Navy veteran convicted for his involvement in the Capitol attack, have declined the pardons, expressing a desire to take responsibility for their actions. Overreach of executive authority. President Trump's executive order to end birthright citizenship represents an egregious overreach of executive power and a profound challenge to the constitutional principles that underpin the United States. Birthright citizenship, guaranteed by the 14th Amendment, affirms that all individuals born on U.S. soil are entitled to citizenship, regardless of their parents' immigration status. This principle, rooted in the Reconstruction era, was explicitly designed to prevent the marginalization of vulnerable populations, such as freed slaves and their descendants, by granting them equal rights under the law. The 14th Amendment's Citizenship Clause is unambiguous. All persons born or naturalized in the United States, and subject to the jurisdiction thereof, are citizens of the United States. By attempting to end birthright citizenship through executive order, Trump bypasses the legislative and judicial processes required to amend the Constitution. Such an action directly violates the separation of powers and sets a dangerous precedent for unilateral executive authority. Legal scholars across the political spectrum have denounced this action as unconstitutional. Amending or redefining a constitutional provision is a task reserved for Congress and the states, not the executive branch. Trump's move undermines these checks and balances, signaling a willingness to expand executive power at the expense of constitutional integrity. Arrogance in governance. Trump's justification for ending birthright citizenship reflects an arrogant disregard for the historical and legal significance of the 14th Amendment. Framing this policy as a solution to alleged abuses by undocumented immigrants weaponizes the amendment against marginalized groups it was originally intended to protect. The executive order perpetuates harmful stereotypes about immigrants, portraying them as exploiters of U.S. resources rather than contributors to the nation's growth. This rhetoric further divides the nation and stigmatizes communities, fostering an environment of exclusion and discrimination. Implications for national identity. Ending birthright citizenship would fundamentally alter the fabric of American society, creating a two-tiered system of belonging. Children born in the U.S. to undocumented parents would face statelessness or legal limbo, denying them access to basic rights and opportunities. This policy undermines the idea of America as a nation of immigrants and a beacon of equality. Instead, it signals a shift toward exclusionary nationalism that prioritizes fear over fairness. Trump's executive order to end birthright citizenship epitomizes a dangerous combination of executive overreach and arrogant abuse of power. It threatens to erode constitutional protections, sow division, and undermine the values that have long defined the United States as a land of opportunity and equality. This overreach must be challenged to preserve the rule of law and ensure that America remains true to its foundational principles. Firing of Inspectors General. President Trump's firing of Inspectors General, IGs, and civil servants demonstrates a troubling overreach of executive power and directly aligns with Project 2025's objective to replace impartial professionals with loyalists beholden to the administration. This pattern of behavior undermines the independence of federal agencies and weakens institutional safeguards designed to prevent abuses of power. Undermining accountability. Inspectors General serve as independent watchdogs within the federal government, tasked with investigating misconduct and ensuring accountability. Their independence is crucial for maintaining trust in government institutions. Trump's dismissal of multiple IGs, including those overseeing critical investigations into his previous administration, represents a blatant disregard for the role of oversight. For example, his firing of Michael Atkinson, the IG who handled the Ukraine whistleblower complaint, sent a clear message. Loyalty to the administration takes precedence over accountability and the rule of law. By removing IGs who hold the administration accountable, Trump has dismantled critical checks and balances, paving the way for unchecked executive authority. Civil servant protections, a target of Project 2025. Federal civil servants are protected under laws that ensure their roles are nonpartisan and based on merit rather than political loyalty. These protections prevent administrations from politicizing the workforce and ensure continuity and professionalism in government. Trump's revival of Schedule F, a 2020 executive order reclassified thousands of career civil servants as at-will employees, undermines these protections. This reclassification enables the president to fire career professionals en masse and replace them with political appointees. While Schedule F was rescinded by President Biden, Trump's reinstatement of this order on his first day in office directly reflects Project 2025's goal to purge the federal government of dissenters and fill it with loyalists. Civil servants, including scientists, economists, and intelligence analysts, have reported increased pressure to conform to political agendas under these policies, compromising the impartiality of their work. Project 2025 and the hostile takeover of government. Project 2025, a conservative blueprint for restructuring federal governance, explicitly seeks to consolidate power within the executive branch by replacing career civil servants with individuals aligned with the administration's ideology. This objective is rooted in the belief that federal agencies have become too independent and resistant to conservative reforms. By dismantling the professional civil service, Project 2025 aims to ensure that all government actions align with the administration's political priorities, effectively transforming the federal workforce into an extension of the president's agenda. Why this matters: dismantling safeguards. Civil servants and IGs are essential for maintaining transparency, accountability, and institutional integrity. Their removal or replacement with political loyalists threatens the impartial functioning of government and risks turning federal agencies into tools for advancing partisan interests. The targeting of these individuals signals a broader strategy to eliminate dissent and consolidate power, further undermining public trust in government institutions. Trump's actions to fire IGs and weaken protections for civil servants highlight an alarming trend toward politicizing the federal workforce. This effort, closely tied to the objectives of Project 2025, aims to replace impartial professionals with loyalists, compromising the independence and accountability of government institutions. If left unchecked, these actions threaten to erode the foundational principles of nonpartisan governance and the rule of law, with long-lasting consequences for democracy. Lack of ethical leadership. Upon assuming office on January 20th, 2025, President Donald Trump rescinded existing ethics rules established by the previous administration and has not implemented a new ethics pledge for his administration's appointees. This departure from long-standing presidential norms has raised significant concerns among ethics watchdogs and the public. Historically, since President John F. Kennedy's tenure, incoming presidents have issued executive orders outlining ethical guidelines for their administrations, typically on their first day in office. These ethics pledges are designed to prevent conflicts of interest and ensure that executive branch officials serve the public interest without undue external influence. By not instituting such a pledge, President Trump has deviated from this tradition, deliberately opening the door to conflicts of interest within the executive branch. The absence of an ethics pledge may lead to increased susceptibility to outside influences and a lack of accountability among political appointees. This move has been interpreted by some as prioritizing personal and political interests over established ethical standards, thereby undermining public trust in the administration's commitment to ethical governance. President Trump's decision to forego an ethics pledge represents a significant shift from established presidential practices, raising concerns about potential conflicts of interest and the overall integrity of the executive branch. Justice system concerns. In July 2024, the U.S. Supreme Court issued a landmark decision in Trump versus United States, significantly expanding the scope of presidential immunity. The court ruled that a former president is entitled to absolute immunity from criminal prosecution for actions within the conclusive and preclusive constitutional authority of the presidency, such as issuing pardons, commanding the military, executing laws, and overseeing the executive branch. Additionally, the court established that former presidents have at least presumptive immunity for all official acts, though this does not extend to unofficial conduct. This decision has profound implications for the U.S. justice system. By granting absolute immunity for certain presidential actions, the ruling effectively places these actions beyond the reach of criminal prosecution, raising concerns about accountability and the potential for abuse of power. This level of immunity undermines the foundational democratic principle that no individual is above the law. Justice Sonia Sotomayor, in her dissent, cautioned that the decision could lead to a scenario where a president becomes a king above the law, capable of committing severe offenses without facing legal consequences. The ruling also complicates the balance of power among the branches of government. By limiting the judiciary's ability to prosecute certain presidential actions, the decision may erode the system of checks and balances designed to prevent any one branch from accumulating excessive power. This shift could embolden presidents to engage in actions that, while within their official capacity, may contravene ethical norms or democratic principles, as we are currently witnessing play out. Recent developments within the U.S. justice system have raised significant concerns regarding the potential erosion of its independence and the targeting of individuals perceived as political adversaries. Pam Bondi's pledge to investigate the investigators and prosecute the prosecutors. Pam Bondi, nominated by President Trump for the position of Attorney General, has publicly committed to scrutinizing and potentially prosecuting those who have previously investigated or prosecuted members of the Trump administration. During an interview, Bondi stated, "The prosecutors will be prosecuted. The investigators will be investigated." This stance has prompted concerns about the potential politicization of the Department of Justice, DOJ. Such actions could transform the DOJ into a tool for political retribution, undermining its foundational principle of impartiality. Bondi's history as a staunch Trump supporter and her involvement in defending him during his first impeachment trial further amplify these apprehensions. Kash Patel's enemies list. Kash Patel, nominated by President Trump to lead the Federal Bureau of Investigation, FBI, has compiled and publicized a list of individuals he deems adversaries. This list includes political figures, former government officials, and journalists who have been critical of the Trump administration. The existence of such a list has been described by some as a wolf at the door of our democracy, suggesting that it poses a significant threat to democratic principles. The concern is that the FBI, under Patel's leadership, could be weaponized to target political opponents, thereby compromising its independence and integrity. Implications for the justice system. The combination of Bondi's and Patel's positions raises alarms about the potential for the justice system to be used as a means of political retribution. Such actions could erode public trust in these institutions and challenge the foundational democratic principle of an impartial and independent judiciary. The Supreme Court's decision to grant absolute presidential immunity for specific official acts, combined with the pledges and actions of key nominees, such as Pam Bondi and Kash Patel, raises significant concerns about the preservation of justice system independence and the safeguarding of democratic norms. These developments challenge the principles of executive accountability and the separation of powers, potentially transforming the justice system into a tool for political retribution and undermining public trust in its impartiality and integrity. Together, they signal a troubling shift in the balance of power and the foundational principles that uphold democratic governance. While some argue that Trump's comments about being a dictator or staying in office indefinitely are made in jest, such statements have deeper implications. Normalizing dangerous ideas. Authoritarian aspirations. Joking about dictatorship or remaining in power indefinitely plants the idea that such behavior is acceptable or possible. This erodes the public's understanding of and commitment to democratic norms. Authoritarian leaders in history, such as Hitler and Mussolini, often started by testing public reactions to jokes or exaggerated comments about consolidating power. These comments may be used to test how much resistance or acceptance they garner. If such statements are met with apathy or approval, it emboldens further erosion of democratic principles. The Constitution clearly limits presidents to 2 terms. By joking about remaining in power, Trump trivializes these boundaries, encouraging supporters to view such limits as negotiable. These comments undermine confidence in the peaceful transfer of power, a cornerstone of U.S. democracy. After the January 6th insurrection, the consequences of undermining trust in elections became glaringly clear. Destabilization of democratic norms. Undermining institutional integrity. Project 2025's focus on politicizing institutions risks eroding public trust in government neutrality. Potential for long-term damage. Once trust in democratic institutions is lost, it takes generations to rebuild, as seen in countries that have struggled to recover from authoritarian regimes. Threat to peaceful governance. Encouraging division. Comments about dictatorship and sweeping reforms like Project 2025 amplify political polarization, creating an environment ripe for unrest and violence. Systemic issues in the USGS. Influence of corporate lobbying. Corporations and special interest groups wield significant power in shaping legislation, often at the expense of ordinary citizens. Partisan deadlock. Increasing polarization in Congress has led to legislative gridlock, making it difficult to address pressing issues like climate change, healthcare, and infrastructure. Inequitable representation. The Electoral College and Senate structure can disproportionately amplify the influence of smaller states, leading to unequal representation. Economic inequality. Policies have often favored the wealthy and corporations, exacerbating income inequality and leaving working-class Americans behind. Lack of ethical oversight. Conflicts of interest. Accusations of nepotism and self-enrichment during the previous Trump administration highlighted the lack of robust ethical oversight for public officials. Resistance to accountability. Efforts to avoid oversight, such as refusing to release tax returns, challenge norms of transparency. Why these issues matter. Resistance to accountability. The need for greater transparency and accountability. The need for reforms to reduce undue influence and promote equity. The need for measures to restore public trust in governance and institutions. Trump's comments and the Heritage Foundation's Project 2025 represent more than isolated issues. They are part of broader trends that threaten democratic governance. These actions and ideas, if left unchecked, could normalize authoritarian practices, weaken institutions, and undermine the foundational principles of the United States. The composition and stability of a presidential administration significantly impact governance effectiveness, policy implementation, and public trust. High turnover rates. Historically, the Trump administration has experienced unprecedented turnover among senior officials. This instability can lead to several issues. Policy disruption. Frequent changes in leadership can result in inconsistent policy application and hinder long-term strategic planning. Loss of institutional knowledge. Departing experienced officials take with them valuable expertise, which is not easily replaced. Decreased morale, continuous turnover can demoralize remaining staff, affecting productivity and commitment. For instance, during Trump's first term, the administration saw a turnover rate of 85% among senior-level advisors, surpassing that of his 5 predecessors. Appointment of loyalists. Recent cabinet appointments have raised concerns about the prioritization of loyalty over qualifications. Pete Hegseth as Secretary of Defense, a former Fox News personality with limited Defense Administration experience, Hegseth's confirmation was narrowly secured with a 50-50 Senate vote, broken by Vice President J.D. Vance. Kristi Noem as Secretary of Homeland Security, the former South Dakota governor, lacking a law enforcement background, was confirmed with a 59-34 Senate vote. Her appointment underscores concerns about the emphasis on political loyalty over relevant experience. Potential implications. These developments may lead to erosion of expertise. Appointing individuals without pertinent experience can undermine the effectiveness of federal agencies. Politicization of institutions. Prioritizing loyalty may compromise the objectivity and integrity of governmental operations. Public distrust. Perceived cronyism can diminish citizens' confidence in their leaders and institutions. The combination of high turnover rates and the appointment of loyalists with questionable qualifications poses risks to effective governance and public trust. It is crucial for the administration to balance loyalty with competence to ensure the efficient functioning of government and the preservation of democratic principles. Why these combined threats are dangerous. Concerns about a hostile government takeover involve the erosion of democratic principles and the consolidation of power in ways that undermine accountability, fairness, and institutional independence. The signs of such a takeover, often gradual, are rooted in historical patterns and present-day evidence. Here's how current events could equate to such a scenario and the evidence supporting these claims. Historical parallels. Authoritarian playbook. Historical figures with authoritarian tendencies often undermine democratic systems from within by centralizing power, undermining trust in elections or governance, using the guise of efficiency or reform to dismantle safeguards. Examples include the fall of the Weimar Republic, Germany, which paved the way for Hitler, and Hungary's democratic backslide under Viktor Orbán. Centralization of power. Consolidation of executive control. A hostile takeover often begins with efforts to concentrate power in the executive branch, sidelining checks and balances. Examples. Project 2025, the Heritage Foundation's blueprint advocates reducing the independence of federal agencies by replacing career civil servants with political appointees. This creates a government loyal to the executive rather than impartial governance. Efforts to dismiss or disempower independent watchdogs, e.g., inspectors general, and whistleblowers reduce transparency. Why this equates to a hostile takeover. A hostile takeover of a government doesn't necessarily involve tanks in the streets. Instead, it often involves gradual erosion of norms, actions that normalize authoritarian behaviors. Consolidation of power, weakening institutions and centralizing authority in the executive. Public compliance through division, polarizing the population to prevent unified opposition. Legal and institutional manipulation, using existing systems to entrench power while authoritarian regimes, e.g., Nazi Germany, Hungary under Orbán, used similar strategies to weaken the judiciary, legislature, and independent agencies, consolidating power in the executive. Undermining democratic norms. Discrediting elections. Questioning the integrity of elections without evidence is a classic tactic to undermine public confidence in democracy. Evidence. Trump and allies repeatedly claimed election fraud in 2020, despite courts, audits, and bipartisan officials finding no evidence. Calls to overturn election results and pressure on state officials, e.g., the Georgia phone call to find 11,780 votes, highlight attempts to subvert the democratic process. Disregard for term limits. Jokes about remaining in office indefinitely or statements praising authoritarian leaders who hold power for life raise concerns about normalizing the erosion of term limits. Politicization of institutions. Appointments based on loyalty. Appointing individuals without the necessary qualifications, but with loyalty to the executive undermines institutional integrity. Evidence. High-profile appointments of loyalists to key roles, such as Kristi Noem, DHS, and Pete Hegseth, DOD, reflect prioritization of allegiance over competence. Efforts to replace career officials with partisans through Schedule F reforms weaken institutional independence. Weaponizing federal agencies. Using agencies like the DOJ or IRS for political purposes is a hallmark of authoritarian regimes. Evidence. Past public statements by Trump expressing frustration at the DOJ for not investigating political opponents. Claims of using federal law enforcement to suppress dissent during protests, e.g., Lafayette Square clearing. Pardoning allies and promoting lawlessness. Undermining accountability. Pardoning allies convicted of serious crimes creates a culture of impunity. Evidence. Trump pardoned individuals like Michael Flynn, Roger Stone, and Steve Bannon, who were convicted or accused of crimes tied to political or financial misconduct. Pardons for war criminals undermine military discipline and international norms. Inciting violence. A hostile takeover often includes tacit or explicit encouragement of violence to silence opposition. Evidence. Trump's rhetoric during and leading up to January 6, 2021, was seen by many as incitement to attack the Capitol to disrupt the certification of election results. Weakening public trust. Misinformation campaigns. Deliberate dissemination of falsehoods erodes trust in institutions and creates a divided public. Evidence. False claims about the election being stolen fueled division and violence. Consistent attacks on the press as fake news delegitimize independent journalism and create echo chambers for disinformation. Polarization and division. Hostile takeovers thrive on dividing the population into us versus them factions, making it easier to consolidate power without unified resistance. Evidence. Polarizing rhetoric labeling critics as enemies of the state or unpatriotic. Erosion of checks and balances. Judicial undermining. Appointing partisan judges or ignoring court rulings weakens judicial independence. Evidence. Statements questioning the legitimacy of court decisions unfavorable to Trump. Efforts to influence the judiciary by appointing ideologically loyal judges. Legislative marginalization. Bypassing Congress through executive orders concentrates power in the presidency. Evidence. Trump's reliance on executive orders to enact controversial policies, e.g., immigration bans, bypassed the legislative process. Evidence of authoritarian tendencies. Rhetorical admiration for dictators. Comments praising leaders like Kim Jong-un, Vladimir Putin, and Xi Jinping indicate a preference for authoritarian governance styles. Encouraging anti-democratic ideas. Jokes or remarks about becoming a dictator or extending term limits, even if framed humorously, normalize these concepts among supporters, eroding safeguards. There are notable similarities between Trump's rhetoric and policies on immigration and the early treatment of Jewish people in Germany during Hitler's rise to power. While the contexts are vastly different, examining these parallels is important to understand how language and policy can influence public perception and lead to systemic discrimination. Here are some comparisons. Scapegoating a group. Trump's rhetoric. Frequently referred to undocumented immigrants as criminals, rapists, and drug dealers, creating a narrative that tied immigrants to societal problems. Policies like the mass deportations announced in 2025 aimed to portray immigrants as a threat to national security and economic stability. Hitler's rhetoric. Blamed Jews for Germany's economic struggles, political instability, and moral decline following World War I. Anti-Jewish propaganda portrayed Jewish people as dangerous, corrupt, and subhuman. Dehumanization through language. Trump. Use terms like invasion to describe migration at the US-Mexico border, which dehumanizes immigrants and stokes fear among citizens. Hitler. Referred to Jews as vermin and parasites, fostering a sense of dehumanization that justified persecution. Policies targeting specific groups. Trump. Expanded immigration enforcement and deportations, detaining families in facilities, separating children from parents, and imposing bans on immigrants from certain countries. Efforts to end birthright citizenship targeted immigrants' children, potentially rendering many stateless. Hitler. Early policies before World War II, such as the Nuremberg Laws, restricted Jews' rights to citizenship, employment, and property, effectively making them second-class citizens. Normalization of discrimination. Trump. Policies like the Muslim ban and mass deportations, alongside rhetoric blaming immigrants for societal issues, contributed to normalizing discrimination. Hitler. Anti-Jewish laws and propaganda normalized widespread societal discrimination against Jews, setting the stage for larger atrocities. Impact on broader society. Trump. Rhetoric and policies have increased polarization and incidents of xenophobia, with some supporters using his language to justify hate crimes or exclusionary behavior. Hitler. The dehumanization and blame of Jews fueled widespread acceptance of discriminatory practices, which escalated to genocide. Key differences. Scale and context. Hitler's policies culminated in the Holocaust, which sought the systematic extermination of Jewish people and other marginalized groups. Trump's rhetoric and policies, while inflammatory and harmful, have not yet approached this level of systemic genocide. Public resistance. In the U.S., courts, advocacy groups, and public protests have resisted and challenged Trump's immigration policies, indicating stronger institutional and societal checks compared to pre-war Germany. Why comparisons matter? The comparison serves as a warning about how dehumanizing rhetoric and discriminatory policies can escalate. Even when they don't lead to genocide, such actions can destabilize societies, deepen divisions, and normalize prejudice. What these corollaries teach us: the importance of equity. Empires that neglect the needs of the majority and concentrate power in the hands of the elite sow seeds of discontent and rebellion. The cost of overreach. Expanding too far, whether militarily or economically, leads to resource depletion and domestic instability. The need for adaptation. Failure to modernize and address systemic challenges accelerates decline. The value of trust and unity. Divided societies with low public trust in leadership are more vulnerable to collapse. The United States' current governance structure and societal challenges bear striking similarities to factors that contributed to the decline of previous empires. By identifying these historical parallels, we can better understand the risks facing the U.S. and the potential consequences of inaction. Historical parallels. Decay of democratic principles. Historical parallel: the Weimar Republic. Then, the Weimar Republic of Germany struggled with political extremism, economic crises, and the erosion of democratic norms. Disillusionment with democracy allowed authoritarian leaders to exploit public fear and resentment. Now, in the U.S., political norms and democratic processes are under strain, with increasing attempts to undermine election integrity and checks on executive power. The rise of populist and authoritarian rhetoric echoes the dynamics of the Weimar Republic. Attacks on free press and judicial independence weaken the foundation of democratic governance. Concentration of wealth and economic inequality. Historical parallel: the Roman Empire. Then, the Roman Empire suffered from severe economic inequality, with wealth concentrated among the elite while the majority lived in poverty. Heavy taxation of the working class and rampant corruption enriched the ruling class at the expense of economic stability. The decline of small-scale farmers and reliance on enslaved labor weakened the middle class and created economic stagnation. Now, in the U.S., wealth inequality has reached record levels, with the top 1% controlling a significant portion of the nation's wealth. Corporate lobbying and tax policies often favor the wealthy, while wages for the middle and lower classes have stagnated. A shrinking middle class threatens economic stability and weakens social cohesion. Political corruption and erosion of public trust. Historical parallel: the late Byzantine Empire. Then, the Byzantine Empire suffered from widespread corruption among bureaucrats and elites, leading to inefficiency and discontent. Political infighting and favoritism undermined public confidence in leadership. Distrust of the government made it difficult to unify against external threats. Now, public trust in U.S. institutions, including Congress, the presidency, and the judiciary, is at historic lows. Corruption scandals, partisan gridlock, and the influence of money in politics erode faith in the government's ability to act in the public's best interest. This distrust creates a fractured society, making collective action difficult. Overexpansion and military overreach. Historical parallel: the British Empire. Then, the British Empire overextended its military and economic resources to maintain control over its vast colonies. The costs of maintaining a global empire drained domestic resources and caused unrest at home. Colonial uprisings and wars of independence further weakened Britain's hold on its territories. Now, the U.S. maintains a significant global military presence, with hundreds of bases worldwide and frequent involvement in international conflicts. The costs of these operations strain domestic budgets, diverting resources from critical infrastructure, education, and healthcare. Growing skepticism about the necessity of foreign interventions highlights the risk of imperial fatigue. Social division and polarization. Historical parallel: the French Ancien Regime. Then, in pre-revolutionary France, stark divisions between the aristocracy, clergy, and commoners created widespread resentment. The ruling class dismissed or suppressed the grievances of the lower classes, fueling revolutionary fervor. Now, the U.S. is deeply polarized along political, economic, racial, and cultural lines. Disparities in wealth, systemic injustices, and lack of representation for marginalized groups fuel social unrest. The inability to bridge divides exacerbates tension, increasing the risk of civil instability. Environmental degradation. Historical parallel: the Mayan civilization. Then, the Mayan civilization faced environmental collapse due to deforestation, soil degradation, and unsustainable agricultural practices. These environmental challenges exacerbated food shortages and social unrest. Now, the U.S. faces rising environmental crises, including climate change, water shortages, and loss of biodiversity. Resistance to sustainable policies and reliance on fossil fuels mirror the unsustainable practices of past empires. Failure to adapt to change. Historical parallel: the Qing dynasty. Then, the Qing dynasty fell behind technologically and economically because of its resistance to modernization and reliance on outdated systems. Internal rebellion and external pressures from Western powers exposed its weaknesses. Now, the U.S. faces challenges in adapting to rapid technological advancements, including automation, AI, and global economic shifts. Resistance to addressing systemic issues like healthcare, education, and climate change hampers progress and innovation. External pressures and competition. Historical parallel: the Soviet Union. Then, the Soviet Union collapsed under the weight of economic stagnation, an arms race with the U.S., and internal political instability. It struggled to compete with Western powers while maintaining control over its sphere of influence. Now, the U.S. faces rising competition from global powers like China and Russia. Economic and technological competition, coupled with cyber threats and propaganda, strains the U.S.'s global influence. Path forward for the U.S. To avoid the fate of these past empires, the U.S. must rebuild trust, strengthen transparency, accountability, and inclusivity in governance, address inequality, implement policies that reduce wealth disparities and promote social mobility, reform institutions, modernize systems to adapt to technological, economic, and environmental challenges, focus on sustainability, prioritize long-term stability over short-term gains. What can be done? Stay informed. Educate yourself and others about the implications of policies like Project 2025 and rhetoric about authoritarianism. Advocate for democratic safeguards. Support legislation and initiatives that strengthen election security. Protect civil servants from partisan influence. Reinforce checks and balances. Vote and mobilize. Participate in elections and advocate for leaders who uphold democratic norms and reject authoritarian tendencies. Demand transparency. Hold think tanks and political leaders accountable for their agendas, ensuring they operate in the public interest rather than for narrow partisan goals. Strengthen institutional independence. Protect career civil servants from partisan purges. Promote civic education. Teach citizens to recognize authoritarian tactics and the importance of democratic values. Demand accountability. Hold leaders accountable for attempts to undermine democratic norms. Advocate for election integrity. Support reforms that ensure free and fair elections. Conclusion. The challenges facing the United States today are not insurmountable, but require decisive action to preserve the democratic values and principles upon which the nation was built. The lessons of history, coupled with the evidence of contemporary governance failures, serve as a stark warning of the potential consequences of inaction. By addressing systemic inequalities, reinforcing institutional independence, and fostering transparency and accountability, the U.S. can navigate its current challenges and move towards a more equitable, sustainable, and unified future. The time for complacency has passed. The moment for transformative change is now.